Today, President Obama sent to the Federal Register this notice. Look, consistent with Section 202D of the National Emergencies Act, I am continuing for 1 year the national emergency previously declared on September 14th, 2001. Because the terrorist threat continues, the national emergency declared on September 14th, 2001, and the powers and authorities adopted to deal with that emergency must continue in effect beyond September 14th, 2012. Therefore, I'm continuing in effect for an additional year the national emergency that was declared in 2001 with respect to the terrorist threat. What does the word emergency even mean anymore if we can establish one for a year in advance? And when what we're calling now an emergency is starting its 12th straight year, it will be a good day in America and a good day in the English language when the word emergency is allowed to get its meaning back. The reason we're getting a year 12 of our national state of emergency is because of those powers and authorities that we justified with the actual emergency that took place in this country 11 years ago. But they are powers and authorities that the government does not want to give up this long down the line. More than a year after bin Laden, the head of al-Qaeda, was killed, 11 years into our national state of emergency declared at the time of the 9/11 attacks, in the middle of a presidential campaign that on one side is basically just refusing to reckon with national security issues as a political matter pretty much at all, we are still faced as a country with basic, current, today questions about our willingness to give our government power to do stuff. One of the things that affects how much power we think the government ought to have is this thing. It's called the Constitution, what we believe our government is legally allowed to do. But even within that basic framework, there is also the extent to which we think there's a threat that the government needs to take extraordinary measures to respond to. And there's the extent to which we think those extraordinary measures will actually keep us safe from whatever that threat is. It's not just a question of whether we're scared enough to give the government new powers. It's whether those new powers really will help against whatever this thing is that we are scared of. And that is pretty close to an empirical question. And that is why the new bombshell reporting by Kurt Eichenwald, which ran as an op-ed in today's New York Times, but is also in his new book, is so important. Mr. Eichenwald, in reporting for this new book, says it was not just that famous bin Laden determined to strike in the U.S. presidential daily briefing that the Bush administration received and ignored less than a month before 9/11, excuse me, just over a month before 9/11. It was a whole series of presidential daily briefs, all through May and June and July of 2001, all warning of a planned major strike by al-Qaeda in the United States, which then, of course, ultimately happened in September of that year. There's a responsibility to get history right for its own sake, right? But if we have been telling ourselves all along something that is untrue about what it would take to keep us safe, if we've been telling ourselves a fairy tale all along about how much government powers and intrusion need to be expanded because what we had before wasn't enough to reasonably expect the government to act to keep us safe, it is very important that we correct that record and get that right, because how we are living now in this 12th year of our national emergency is still based in part on this idea that way back then, before we made all these changes, nobody could have seen this coming. Joining us now for the interview is Kurt Eichenwald. He's a contributing editor at Vanity Fair. He's also the author of 500 Days, Secrets and Lies in the Terror Wars. It's about the decisions made by the White House in the first 500 days after the 9/11 attacks, and the book is out today. Kurt Eichenwald, it's nice to see you here. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's Vanity Fair night on the Rachel Maddow Show.
It really is, and all of us have the same title, I noticed.
In the course of your reporting, you gained access to some presidential daily briefings that are still classified. You've described what's in some of them. What did you find in those briefs, specifically the ones that are still not public information?
What you had was a time after time after time of the Bush administration being told in some far more level of specificity than we've heard before that something was coming, that an attack was coming. You had a May 1st daily brief that went to the president saying, you know, there is a group in the United States that is planning an attack. You had a daily brief that said there are going to be mass casualties. There was a daily brief that said, while it's been delayed, this attack is still coming. And, you know, one of the things, it points out a number of things. It points out, you know, the magnitude of the information that the Bush administration was getting. But to a degree, it also, it goes to what you were saying about history. The history that was contorted and faked was, well, the problem here was the CIA, and the CIA didn't give us enough information to act. And, you know, I can tell you that's an allegation that has tormented the people who were involved in developing that intelligence, because they're basically have been told for 11 years, you're responsible for the people who died. And it's a lie. You know, having seen what's there, the CIA, the people in the Counterterrorist Center, and other intelligence people around the government were banging the drum. We're saying over and over again, we have an attack coming. And, you know, there has been every level of duplicity in terms of dealing with that. I mean, in fact, the very horrifying, I shouldn't just keep going. I should go. The very horrifying, the thing that drum, we're saying over and over again, we have an attack coming. And, you know, there has been every level of duplicity in terms of dealing with that. I mean, in fact, the very horrifying, I shouldn't just keep going. The very horrifying, the thing that shocked everybody, the August 6th, bin Laden determined to strike U.S., that in and of itself was a red herring. Because that went out there, and Condoleezza Rice testified before the 9/11 Commission. This is a historical document, which it was. If you actually read it carefully, it was a historical document. This is what, you know, bin Laden's like, and he's determined to strike U.S. But if we had anything to suggest that there was a strike that was imminent, we would have done something. Well, guess what? That's what the previous briefings say.
It said the attack was imminent.
And it used the word now, I should be careful. I don't remember if she actually said the word imminent. But she did say, well, we were very attentive to this. On July 5th, we had a meeting, and we were all very concerned about these events. We didn't have any specificity. You know, one of the things that's in the book and was also in the op-ed piece is 4 days later, the CIA counterterrorism guys are in a meeting in the basement, and they say, let's all put in for a transfer, because we're going to get blamed for what's about to happen.
We know this is about to happen.
We know it's going to happen. No one will do anything. The way one fellow put it to me years ago when I first was interviewing intelligence people about this is, the blame is not going to be that we didn't tell them. The blame is going to be that we didn't convince them. And they won't let the country know that that's what they're blaming us for.
The language that was in the 9/11 report was his advisors would have told them there was a cell in the United States. If his advisors would have told him there was a cell in the United States, they would have moved to take care of it.
May 1st, 2001, George Bush was told there was a cell in the United States.
Let me ask you to respond to something that was said today by Ari Fleischer. Bush
My favorite person.
Ari Fleischer described you as a 9/11 truther, saying, which essentially is an allegation that you are saying that 9/11 was an inside job, that the 9/11 attacks were perpetrated by the U.S. government as a sort of false flag attack, and that therefore you should be dismissed as a crazy conspiracy theorist.
One of the things about Ari Fleischer and all these people is they're all coming down a very well-worn path. And if you remember when Dick Clark, who was the counterterrorism guy at the NSC, he came out and said, well, this is what happened. And suddenly, boom, he is the most evil person in the world. He's a liar. He's this, he's that. This is what they know how to do. And by they, I mean these folk, I'm not going to say the Bush administration. I'm going to say these people like Ari Fleischer, who can't deal with facts. You know, I was just actually talking with Ari Fleischer, and I said over and over again, Ari, name one fact I've written that's not true. Wouldn't answer it. And his calling me a truther, you know, and basically he's saying that what I am saying is that George Bush intentionally orchestrated 9/11. And that is, you know, you read what I say. I cite CIA briefs. This is what Bush was told. And if Ari Fleischer wants to say that's being a conspiracy theorist, then never expect that we're going to get any real history out of the Bush administration.
And getting the real history of this right is really important, not just for that history, but for the decisions we're still making based on
Absolutely.
that. Kurt Eichenwald, contributing editor of Vanity Fair. The new book is called 500 Days: Secrets and Lies in the Terror Wars, and you lit everybody up today with this op-ed based on the reporting. Thanks for talking to us about it tonight.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll be right back. That 9/11 was an inside job, that the 9/11 attacks were perpetrated by the U.S. government as a sort of false flag attack, that 9/11 was an inside job, that the 9/11 attacks were perpetrated by the U.S. government as a sort of false flag attack, that 9/11 was an inside job, that the 9/11 attacks were perpetrated by the U.S. government as a sort of false flag attack,